Hey guys, this is Turnbull88 again, and today we have a very interesting topic to discuss, and that is the war in the spring of 1609 between the Ryukyu Kingdom and Satsuma Domain of Japan. Alright, so I'll go ahead and jump right into this by comparing their forces, starting with Satsuma Domain. Satsuma's expeditionary force consisted of about 3,000 samurai, most of whom were veterans of the invasions of Korea. They also had another 3,000 sailors and workers who stayed on the 100 warships that Satsuma had amassed. Their leader was Shimazu Ieyasu, who had just become daimyo in 1602. The expeditionary force was led by General Kabayama Hisataka, who had actually been a very unknown commander up until this point. Over the course of the Warring States period, Satsuma Domain expanded to control almost all of the island of Kyushu, until they were defeated by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who stripped them of most of their land. The army fielded by Satsuma utilized a wide variety of weapons and equipment. Their elite soldiers were horse-mounted samurai that used the Yumi bow. However, most of their force was made up of infantry who used the katana, wakizashi, and naginata. However, their most effective weapon was the teppo, or Japanese musket. Since their introduction by the Portuguese, these European-style muskets had proven decisive at the end of the Warring States period and the war in Korea, where the use of the volley fire technique proved very effective. The Satsuma Navy used two types of ships. The first was a small troop transport called the Sengoku Bune, which originally was a cargo ship converted to carry troops. The second is the Atake Bune, which has been described as a castle on the ocean. These ships did not have cannons, and their main tactic was to approach enemy ships and board them. Their biggest weakness was that they were coastal ships and were not designed to cross the ocean. Next, we'll discuss the forces of the Ryukyu Kingdom. There is no record of Ryukyu's military forces. However, based on the numbers that we do have, I estimate that they had a standing army of at least 5,000, with additional unknown militia forces and an unknown naval force. Shone was king of Ryukyu during the war, and by that time had been on the throne for 22 years. The king's top three advisors also served as commanders of the three army units that defended the capital. Janatedo, the most senior of the three, also had experience defending the kingdom from pirate attacks. Starting with the unification wars of the early 15th century, the Ryukyu Kingdom expanded and conquered its neighbors, from primitive tribes to rival kingdoms. During the 1450s, Ryukyu defeated Satsuma over control of the Amami and Tokara Islands. They also defeated them in engagements in 1497 and 1571. Given their vast maritime trade network, they also had experience fighting pirates as far as Japan and Korea, down to Indonesia and Thailand. There are few records of the Ryukyuan military, but we do know that they used a mixture of Chinese, Japanese, and local weapons and equipment. While they did have horses, these were reserved for officers who came from nobility. Ryukyuan infantry typically used either a Chinese-style spear or the Japanese wakizashi with a shield. However, they also used Chinese firearms, which they had been using since the 1440s. Chinese firearms, however, were very primitive compared to their European counterparts. On the other hand, they also had Chinese-style cannon, which were very effective both when mounted on fortifications or on ships. Ryukyuan ships, called Chinkunshin or Tosen, were very effective at defeating pirates and other naval threats. They carried up to 100 soldiers and were armed with cannon. In addition, the soldiers on board were equipped with long spears for warding off boarding parties, as well as Chinese firearms. Ryukyuan sailors were some of the most experienced in the world at the time. Because Ryukyu had the home field advantage, they utilized their own fortifications, especially the Ryukyuan castle called a Gasuku. Gasuku are characterized by their massive snaky walls, which follow the contours of the land. Some Gasuku had multiple baileys, others had gun ports and cannon ports, while others still were designed to withstand direct cannon fire. Naturally, the main port at Naha and the capital at Shuri, the heart of the kingdom, was defended by a massive military network, composed of multiple Gasuku and fortresses, as well as a military road that connected them. They all defended the royal palace at Shuri Castle, which itself was a massive fortress. Now for the next part of the video, I'll use military map symbols to illustrate what happened during the war. Now, if you can't memorize these symbols, that's okay. For now, just remember that blue will represent the Ryukyu Kingdom, and red will represent Satsuma's forces. Arrows will show where they're moving. Satsuma began mobilizing troops on the 11th of March, 1609. After gathering enough troops, they set sail on the 8th of April, reaching Amami Oshima on the 11th of April. For the next 2 weeks, they fought tooth and nail to clear the island of Ryukyuan forces, finally pacifying the island on the 20th of April. Because of the fierce resistance they met, they rested and reorganized for 3 days before moving to Tokunoshima, where they again met fierce resistance. The Ryukyuan unit defending Tokunoshima was commanded by Janatero's son-in-law, who, along with 300 other Ryukyuan soldiers, died during the 2 days of fighting. A large militia force was also raised on Tokunoshima, but being armed with kitchen and farming utensils and bamboo spears was no match for Satsuma's guns. Next, something very interesting happened. On the 27th of April, a fleet of Ryukyuan ships was spotted headed for Amami Oshima, and although Satsuma attempted to intercept that fleet, they escaped. Which begs the question, what happened to the fleet? Now, soon after the initial landing on Amami Oshima, a report was sent down to the king to inform him that the invasion had occurred. So the king ordered a mobilization with the intent of sending reinforcements to Amami Oshima. However, by the time the troops had been amassed, the island had fallen and Tokunoshima had fallen. So the reinforcements were cancelled, and instead the troops were sent to Nakajin Castle. However, since these troops had to get there somehow, Ryukyu did have a fleet ready to transport them. Now, Satsuma cataloged the weapons and equipment that they brought, and one item is Kuwa 397. Reading from Stephen Turnbull's book on the invasion, he states that Kuwa were sickle blades mounted on long shafts, which would have been useful for sea fighting should the Ryukyuan Navy have tried to intercept the raid. This means that Satsuma anticipated naval combat with Ryukyu. However, the sighting on the 27th of April is the first and last time that we hear about Ryukyu's fleet during the war, which still, we have no idea why they did not attempt to attack Satsuma at sea, given their experience and their equipment. Anyway, back to the war. So on the 28th of April, they approached the island of Okinawa. Now, this island had a large coral reef around it, which protected it from Satsuma's fleet. However, a high tide came in and allowed the ships to float over the reef, and the islanders surrendered without a fight. Now, on the 29th of April, the Satsuma fleet decided to go around the last obstacle, which would be Yoron Island, and they made their final landing on Kaori Island, right next to Unten Harbor, right off the coast of northern Okinawa. This brings us to the second phase of the war, the battle for Great Ryukyu Island. Now, the situation on the morning of the 30th of April. The Ryukyuan garrison in Nakajin Castle in northern Okinawa had about 300 soldiers and was commanded by the king's son, Shokokushi. In addition, a force of 1,000 Ryukyuan soldiers led by Nagoroho had just arrived. Now, Nakajin Castle was formerly the royal palace of the kingdom of Hokuzan before it was captured by the Ryukyu kingdom. It is the second largest castle in all of Okinawa. It is also heavily defended, has multiple baileys and gun ports in the walls. Now, the Satsuma fleet landed an army, and combat happens on the 30th of April, and Nagoroho lost half of his force and was captured, and the castle was captured and burned to the ground, and the king's son was killed during the fighting. The rest of the Ryukyuan reinforcement force retreated, and the Satsuma fleet re-embarked, moved, and landed much further south at Yomitan. Now, at Yomitan, Satsuma does something very risky. They split their forces in two, so now half of their force is still on board the fleet, and the rest is now on land. Now, where they drop them off is very dangerous for them. To the north is the castle of Sakimi. To the east are the castles of Iha, Goeku, and Katsurin, and to the south are Nakagasuku and Urasoe. So, if the Ryukyuans attempted to coordinate, they could surround and crush Satsuma's army. However, the opposite happens. The Ryukyuans stay in their castles and let Satsuma go by, wreaking havoc through the countryside for unknown reasons. Now, the land army moves south, burning and pillaging on its way to Urasoe Castle. Urasoe is the largest castle in Okinawa, and it was originally the capital of Ryukyu. Now, just like Nakajin, Satsuma's forces reach the castle and overcome it somehow, burning it to the ground. Next, the land army moved further south to the Tairabashi Bridge, which was the last obstacle in the way of Shuri Castle. Satsuma overcame the defenders of the bridge using volley fire with muskets, and the defenders retreated. Not long after the attack on the bridge, Satsuma's fleet made a direct attack on the port of Naha. Now, this is where the massive Ryukyuan military network came into play, because Naha was specifically defended by two forts at the mouth of the port. Between them was a iron chain boom which kept ships from entering the harbor. In addition, there were cannon mounted on the forts which could fire at ships attempting to enter the port. This proved effective at defeating the Satsuma fleet. And so, after taking damage, the fleet retreated and landed further north at Makiminato, where, after disembarking, they reportedly went on a spree of murder and rape. Now, by this time, there were over 2,000 Ryukyuan soldiers just standing around at Naha Port. In the meantime, the royal capital at Shuri was much less heavily defended than it normally would have been. This allowed Satsuma's land army to sneak in, surround, and cut off the capital. Now, Shuri Castle was one of the best defended on the island, but it was designed just like most Gasuku. Its walls had low parapets, which gave the defenders very little cover. This allowed Satsuma's musketmen to clear them, while other infantrymen placed ladders against the wall. Although they did meet fierce resistance, the Ryukyuans eventually were overcome, and samurai were standing in the courtyard of the king's palace. Finally, on the 7th of May, the king surrendered. However, there is a myth that before he did, he stated, "Nuchido Takara," life is precious. Now, if he did in fact say those words, more than likely he meant it in regards to his own life rather than those of his people. And so the war ended in a Satsuma victory. The king was taken prisoner and taken to Japan to meet the shogun. He was also forced to sign a peace treaty which made Ryukyu a vassal of Satsuma and ceded all of the land north of Okinawa. Janatado, who had successfully defended Naha, was executed for refusing to sign the peace treaty. Now, over the course of the war, I estimate that Satsuma lost less than 500 soldiers and Ryukyu lost less than 1,500 soldiers. This does not include civilians and militia. Now, at this point you might be thinking, why was this the outcome? Why did Ryukyu lose? Well, there are a few reasons for that. First and foremost, Satsuma had a lot more experience in land combat during the war in Korea. Also, the design of Kasuku was very susceptible to volley fire from muskets. Third, let's just face it, some of the Ryukyuan commanders were incompetent. They failed to attack when they should have attacked. And last but not least, the Ryukyuan Navy just disappeared. If they had made a stand at any point during the conflict, they probably would have made a huge impact on the outcome of the war. But I digress. Well, if you have any theories on what happened to the missing fleet, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below, like this video, and subscribe to my channel for more content. And as always, see you next time.